God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please take your seats. Just a couple of administrative marks before we get going. A reminder that the meeting is being filmed on Zoom, so conduct yourselves accordingly. We'd like to thank the Coronado Public Library for continuing to provide this great service. Sean Riley and his staff does a wonderful job every time we're here. For those of you viewing at home, please mute your computer and turn off your camera. You may use the chat box for questions in particular. And Alex Burmeister over here in the corner will be happy to take those questions and provide those to our moderators at the appropriate time. And in the back of the room, if you can't hear me, please let me know. I'll lean in a little closer to the microphone. My voice is usually loud enough to carry. So again, thanks to Nick Burmeister and Sean Riley for the work that they do and the support they provide us. We would like to thank the Coronado Library Board of Trustees and the library staff for considering us as a sponsored organization, which makes all the difference, and that gives us the ability to hold these meetings in the library every month. Our coffee this morning is provided by Alex and Amala Brew. There's plenty of it back there. Alex runs the coffee cart outside, you may know, and again, provides great service for us. We are asking for a $3 donation, and you can provide that in the buckets at the rear of the room if you're so inclined. We certainly would appreciate it. We have an exciting program this morning, but we have some other roundtable business to conduct firsthand. First, we have a donation check for the library staff, and thanks for all the great work they do. Sean, come forward. My great pleasure to provide this on behalf of the Coronado Roundtable. Thank you for the service you provide there.
I just want to say, thank you for the generous donation, but also thank you for what you bring to the community, the Roundtable. The interesting speakers, really enhances the learning and education opportunities here at the library. So we really appreciate the partnership. We feel, we're the beneficiaries. So thank you.
I might add that we have a pretty well-traveled group here in the audience and throughout the town. And if you, in your travels, encounter something you think would be worthwhile to have in a forum like this, please find yourself a roundtable member, myself, Kirk Henry, any of the members, Morgan Miller. Talk to us and provide us some contact information. We'd be happy to look into that possibility. We also have a slate of officers and board members to announce. This is for the year ahead. Our slate, the president, of course, is Christian Escoman again this year. Executive Secretary, as he has been for many years, Mike Napolitano, up here in the front row. And our treasurer is Darlene Martolio, sitting in the back. Thank you. Board members include Dave Landon, Morgan Miller, Kathy Parrish, Suzanne Pop, and our brand new board member, Dan Fuller, who is sitting back here. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. We certainly appreciate it. And John Jacobson, Tim LaFleur, and Charlie Martolio and myself are continuing board members for the year ahead. It's really a great pleasure and an honor to serve. Our very special program today is about the League of Wives. And you've probably heard about it. If you haven't, you're about to get some great information about the work that these ladies have done over the years. And here today to introduce today's speaker is our own roundtable board member, Morgan Miller. Morgan, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you so much for coming. It's always great to have a good turnout for these. We're very excited. Some of you probably went to the statue dedication ceremony. This is a big deal for our town. And without further ado, we have 3 people coming today. We have Dr. Christina Baglios-Lentz, a Navy junior growing up predominantly in South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. Christina received her commission to serve as an intel officer in the United States Navy after graduating from Notre Dame ROTC program in 1995. And right after that, married Tim Slentz, a fellow Notre Dame alumni, proud naval aviator the same year. Christina is honored to be the first female in history to serve in Carrier Air Wing 1, deployed aboard the USS George Washington. After 5 years of active service, she transitioned to the Naval Reserves for 5 years and worked in the national security private sector upon moving overseas with her growing family. Upon returning stateside, she began her pursuit of a PhD. earning a master's in security studies and concentrating on international political economy and development with a cultural studies minor for her doctoral degree. Alongside, Christina has worked as a local community volunteer and Navy spouse, mentor, and advocate, largely devoting her efforts to command family readiness and military child educational well-being, for which she has been honored with the Dorothy M. Bradley Award, which recognizes Aviation Spouse of the Year for the Atlantic, and a Meritorious Public Service Award presented by the Commander Naval Air Forces in 2020. Partnering as a consultant with Blue Star Family since 2015, Christina has worked in support of the White House Office of the First Lady's Joining Forces Initiative and the annual White Oak Convening, bringing together the nation's most impactful veteran, military, family, governmental, nonprofit, and philanthropic organizations to improve the overall effectiveness of those serving those who serve. A native to California, Christina returned to the state in 2016 as her husband became the commanding officer of Naval Base Coronado. Tim retired from the Navy in March 2020, and they now enjoy post-military life with their 3 children, Gabriella, Grayson, and Matthew, as Christina has embarked on a relaunch of her professional life, working in the environmental nonprofit sector as the Catholic Diocese of San Diego's Director of Creation Care. She is the daughter of a Navy wife and granddaughter of an Army wife, whose husband fought in Vietnam
and whose son was killed in action in Vietnam. Christina is deeply committed to the League of Wives. And we also have Alexia. They were co-chairs for the ceremony. Christina and Alexia. And Alexia Palacio Peters was born and raised in South Texas. She moved to Coronado in 2017 with her spouse, Josh Peters. Thank you for joining us, Josh. Who is currently on active service in the United States Navy. They currently attend Coronado schools. Ms. Palacios Peters attended the University of Texas at Austin and graduated with a degree in elementary education with a specialty in early childhood education. She obtained her law degree from California Western School of Law with a specialization in child, family, and elder law. She then earned a master's of law from the George Washington Law School in international and corporate law. She has worked in various legal fields for over 14 years, including family law, immigration law, and veterans law. Ms. Palacios Peters currently serves on the Coronado Unified School District School Board. I think you're current president too, right? Of it right now? Currently, excellent. She has volunteered for many organizations, most recently as the co-chair for the League of Wives Memorial Project. And finally, we have Taylor Stockdale, who probably many of you have heard the name Stockdale in this town. In February 1973, Taylor Stockdale was 10 years old and found himself standing on the tarmac of Miramar Naval Air Station waiting his father's return from a PW camp in North Vietnam. Taylor, just 3 when his father left on the ill-fated 7.5-year odyssey, remembers feeling an overwhelming sense of apprehension as his dad emerged from the crowd and gave a welcome address on behalf of the brave men who were held in captivity under very brutal circumstances. While to many this seems to be a day of closure, Taylor's relationship with his bruised and celebrated war hero dad was just beginning. Taylor Stockdale has spent his career in the educational arena. He is noted authority on educational leadership, strategic planning, curriculum development, school financing, and capital philanthropy. Most recently, Taylor was the 6th head of the Webb Schools, a boarding day school with 400 students in Claremont, California. In this long-standing role, Taylor revitalized the curriculum and overall educational program, deepened the school's stature and reputation, and amassed 4 successful campaigns, the most recent being a $200 million centennial campaign. Taylor grew up in Coronado, as many of you already know, and with 3 older brothers, Stan, Sid, and Jim, and his mother and father. He is a graduate of the Colorado College with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science, received a Master of Arts in Economics from the University of Delaware, and a certificate in leadership from the Drucker School of Management at Claremont Graduate University. Taylor is currently the head emeritus for the Webb Schools, trustee at the Bishop School in La Jolla, and serves on the executive board of the World Leading Schools Association. Taylor and his wife Ann, a Coronado native as well, now live happily back in Coronado, and they have 2 grown children, Bailey and Claire, and 2 grandsons, Logan and Liam. So without further ado, please welcome these 3 in this presentation.
Hello, good morning. I just literally flew in from Dubai late last night, so if I look a little out of it, it's because I am. No, I just wanted to kick off the festivities. The people who were really interested in are Christina and Alexia because of this wonderful statue down at Star Park. But I just wanted to start off by saying what memories I have being a kid here in Coronado and being in this library. We used to come down here all the time as a family. My wife and I were watching the morning show this morning, and they said there are 40 days until Christmas. Can you believe that? 40 days. And I was thinking about like what it was like growing up, you know, in the circumstances that I did. And I remember that Christmases were interesting times for the POW and MIA families. And it wasn't, nobody was trying to do anything that would upset us. But every Christmas, there would be these TV vans that would show up at our house. And the story was always the same. You know, another Christmas goes by, you know, here are these kids, you know, enduring Christmas. And I remember one time they told me not to look so happy because I was opening presents. And they're like, no, you need to look like sad that you miss your father. I'm like, okay, you know. But you know, and I think that a lot of the POW families, we would always have these events like that. And I think one of the most amazing things about the wives of the POWs, the League of Wives, and all of the women, is they maintained really natural childhoods for their kids during this whole thing. And, you know, we were playing Little League, we were, you know, just having a great time in Coronado. We knew our fathers were in really dire circumstances for sure, but the first point I'd just like to make is the women who not only were trying to, you know, endure so much uncertainty and manage so much stress, but also they were really creating these childhoods for their kids that were really happy, and they really devoted themselves to that. So that was something that I was thinking about this morning. The second thing I'll say about the League of Wives is how much the Nixon administration really valued their support and their input. A few years ago, they dedicated a sports arena for my parents at my prep school in Connecticut. And I went out there with my brother Sid, who also went to the school. And surprising to everyone, they had the big dedication and the ribbon cutting, and then we all said a few remarks. But surprising to us was this very short man walking up the pathway, and it was Dr. Kissinger, Henry Kissinger. And coincidentally, Henry Kissinger lived in Kent, Connecticut, which was right by the school. And he walked up and he said, "Oh my gosh, Dr. Kissinger, so great to see you." And we ended up having a nice little talk, my brother and I, and Dr. Kissinger, who we knew pretty well through the years. He was very close to my mom and my dad. And he said, "Well, could I say a few words at the ceremony?" And I said, "Of course, no problem." So I remember I went up to the program director and I said, "Dr. Kissinger would like to say a few words." And, "Well, I'm not sure." And I'm like, "Dr. Kissinger would like to say a few words." I'm not going to say it again. And anyway, but what really struck me in his remarks were he didn't talk as much about my dad, but about my mom and about the wives and how important they were. They would go over to Pat Burns, I just saw you there. We have one of the original League of Wives ladies. Stand up, Pat. My goodness. I didn't see you come in. So glad you're here. So, but it was always amazing to me how it was really there. They would go over to the Paris peace talks with President Nixon and Dr. Kissinger, and they were really a part of it. And I think that really struck me about how much they value the input of the League of Wives. But it wasn't always that way. The beginning of my mom and Richard Nixon started out a little rough because the story is that when she had an appointment with the president, she flew out from Coronado. She got the hotel. She went to the White House, the West Wing. She said she was there to see the president. And the president suddenly had something else come up, and he couldn't see her on that day. I know he's busy; he's the president, right? But he didn't know it was Sybil Stockdale who wanted to see him. So this young attaché person comes out, to deliver the bad news to my mom that the president wasn't going to have time for her after all. And it would turn out to be General Haig, Al Haig. And she just lit into the sky like, are you kidding? And at the end of this 3-minute, thing, she said, "Do you hear me? Are you hearing me?" And he said, "Mrs. Stockdale, I've heard you. I'm hearing you so much." His hands were in his pocket, and he was squirming around as she was telling him that she really wanted to see the president. And he said, "I drilled a hole in my pocket, and his change was all on the floor, so he had to pick up his change." Within 30 minutes, she was in front of the president, and it all worked out. But that was how they started. But things picked up after that. And then so that value that they had in the League of Wives at the very top levels, I think is important. And then the third thing I would say is that, for the POWs and MIA wives, I remember as a kid watching them meet. I was a little kid, but I remember them coming over and how they would just bond. And Pat, you were there, right? Just that bond was so intense that they were thrust into the national spotlight. I mean, these are women from Middle America. There was no training in media relations or anything like that, or how to develop a movement to make sure that the American people knew how the POWs were being treated. And they figured it out, but I don't think they ever really knew how important their role was or how big the event became. I was coming up to the library and I see that they have the POW MIA flag out there. Well, they commissioned the person to design that flag. The flag was designed in my home, but they had no idea. They thought that flag was just going to be, during the course of the Vietnam War. And of course, it's turned out to be a lot more than that. And I think it symbolizes how, they just didn't know how big and how important their role was in this point in history until later. In fact, I think when you were doing the statue dedication and developing the RSVP list, it was like we had to tell them that they were heroes. Like, they just didn't even realize the role that they had. And Pat, I think your book really points that out as well. That these were heroes. These women were incredibly important, incredibly strong, and they developed over the course of the late 60s kind of a way to develop a national movement that supported the Vietnam War fully, but also wanted to make sure the government was open to telling the public about how the POWs are being treated. And I think that was also a fine line to walk for them. So that's also an important point. And then I'll just say, of course, look, my dad came home, right? Martin came home, all of Stark. I mean, all the POWs that came home, we were the lucky ones. But it's the MIA families where there wasn't any closure at all. And they're the ones that are the real heroes in my book, because, that's just a terrible situation. And so I always want to be very mindful of the MIA families who didn't have the type of experience that I was able to have. And then the final thing I'll say is, we were talking about when was that seminal moment when the League of Wives really became the League of Wives, when they stopped being a group of women who were like, we've got to do something, and who became this incredible force to be reckoned with. And I mentioned this at the statue dedication, but I think for me it was when my mom appeared on the Today Show in 1970, and I was 8 years old. And I remember going to New York City for the first time, and it was just, I'd never seen anything like it. And we went into the studio of the Today Show, and my mom was going to be, on this television show. I remember all the lights and everything in the studio, and she did this interview. And I feel like I have the interview here, and I'm going to show it. It's 2.5 minutes long, but what it demonstrates to me is how far they had come to 1970 in terms of knowing about the Geneva Convention, knowing about the intricacies of the Vietnam War, knowing about the pressures that they had to apply on the government to get the story told. And if you listen to her remarking, you can tell that they have gone from being a group of women to a league that really knew what they were doing. So I thought I would just share that video very quickly, if I know how.
On September 9, 1965, a United States Navy plane piloted by Commander James Stockdale was downed over North Vietnam. In the spring of 1966, Hanoi issued this picture of Commander Stockdale and described him as a prisoner of war. He is the highest-ranking U.S. naval officer in North Vietnam's hands.
Just some detail about what you know from your husband from these very few letters. What do you know about the way he's been treated?
Well, first of all, I would like to make the point clear that of the almost 1,500 wives who are in my situation, I am one of the very fortunate few. Only about 100 have ever had any word at all. And in his first letters, which were written back in 1965 and 1966, and which were much longer than the present letters, he told me that he was completely alone, had never seen another American since he had been there, and told me that ways he tried to occupy his mind.
So you feel he's in solitary confinement?
Yes, I feel he's in solitary confinement and has been the entire time, because he has never told me differently, and on several occasions has said everything is the same with me.
Mrs. Stockdale, exactly what is your campaign? You are a private individual. What do you feel that you and the other women, children, men who are involved with prisoners of war are going to be able to do?
We are trying to make the world aware of the desperate plight of the prisoners, and have gone to many sources and many spheres of influence to try to make all people aware of their desperate plight.
Hoping that the awareness will put pressure on both the Hanoi government and
Yes.
our own? Is that what the purpose is?
Yes, we want to secure the protection of the Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war for the men. Hanoi signed this convention in 1957 and in effect gave their promise to the world that in case of any armed conflict, even if they didn't recognize it as an armed conflict, that they would protect any men they took as prisoners. And they have violated every basic tenet of this convention. And we feel that they cannot be considered a respectable government in the world community unless they honor their word as they gave it when they signed this convention. And we hope by making everyone aware of the plight of the prisoners to get the protection of the convention to the men.
So you don't want to mess with her. Yeah. And a young Barbara Walters too, and Hugh Downs. Anyway, so that was sort of, to me, that was the moment. Of course, when you're 8 years old, you're not aware of moments like that. But to me, watching my mom in that national spotlight was like, wow, like she's something else. And as were all the other women who would meet on 547A Avenue and monthly and go through their plans and really make a big impact on the war and in the world. And then finally, I'll just say what an incredible gift it was to be here in Coronado. It's like a big family, and it always felt that way. And it was immensely important to be in the midst of so many friends. Looking at Jim Plum right here. Jim Plum was my mom's favorite friend of the family, and I mean that. And Jim would crash our house during Thanksgivings when my dad came home, and my dad would just look at him like, who is this guy? But my mom liked him, so that's all that matters. But anyway, the Plums have been a huge part of our family. But we were incredibly lucky. And then, of course, when he came home and retired, being able to live here was just a huge gift as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina Slentz to go first, or I'm not sure which. Okay. And we'll talk about the statue. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming here today. Thank you, Morgan. That was a more than generous introduction and more detail than probably anybody needed to hear. But I am so happy to be here and cannot express enough gratitude to this community for really embracing this project. It really does take all of us to do this kind of a thing to mark history as we have done. So I also want to thank Taylor for your family support to the project, being our honorary co-chairs, made a massive difference, especially in that you helped us chart a course that we always knew was heading in the right direction. That was very important, and we can't be more grateful to you in that regard. And also Alexia, I knew tangentially, I would say, before we started, and but we got to a point where I think we were sort of like through text and everything else, like in each other's head continuously at times, and could not ask for a better partner and friend. So thank you, Alexia. Thank you to Josh also for tolerating us. And we have several of the League of Wives Memorial Project team members that are in the audience. If you guys could stand for just a second, I would like everybody to get a chance to recognize you. Thank you so much. Nancy and Millie were integral to our efforts every step of the way. And that really is important, because in a lot of ways, you know, more than once we found ourselves saying, you know, how is our dynamic reflecting the dynamic of the original League of Wives, and feeling true to their legacy in that connection that we were continuing to embrace and leverage as what would power us through. And so those ladies we owe the most gratitude to. And as Taylor already pointed out, Pat Mearns is in the audience with us today. And Pat became a mentor for many of us, being able to sit with the ladies. We tried to do league lunches with our ladies as frequently as possible. They also ensured that we were charting a course that was on track, and then became mentors and lifelong friends. And so thank you, Pat, for being here today. And I think you were probably our best and possibly favorite cheerleader of all. So thank you, Pat. So I received a call from Mr. Mike Woody back there in May of 2021, and we had been retired for about a year at this time. COVID was still very much hanging over everything. And we were actually not sure if we were going to stay in this area or whether we were going to be moving back to the East Coast. And he asked if I would be interested in co-chairing the League of Wives Memorial Project. And my first inclination was, you know, gosh, I just finished this military spouse thing. I was born into the Navy. I was a naval officer. I've been trying to get out of this, you know, game for like that time, 47 years, you know, and, you know, I just couldn't get out. And so I thought about it, and I want to share with you today my why, about why I said yes. As Morgan mentioned, I am the granddaughter of Army spouse, the daughter of a Navy spouse. I was a service member, and now I'm a Navy mom, so apparently I really can't get out of this ever. So that's okay. That's okay. And I also had the great honor and privilege of working on this national military family and veteran advocacy project for a couple of years, where we were looking at the military civilian social divide in America. You know, Coronado is actually very unique, that everyone here knows somebody on active duty, like probably within 10 houses, right? And so we are unique in that way. We are unique in the support and shared identity and friendship that so many of the people here in Coronado have. In the rest of the country, a lot of folks, when we look across the country, don't know a single person in the military. And so there is this divide of just not really intentionally being divided against each other, just a lack of knowledge and familiarity. And so we were talking more about how do we ensure that the American public understands the challenge of military service members, of veterans, and their families. And as I considered this opportunity to be part of the League of Wives Memorial Project, I started thinking about the way that these women really functioned unintentionally as a pivot point in military family history, and how they transformed the role of the military spouse, even though they didn't really mean to, but that was the outcome. And I had read In Love and War back in the 90s when I was an intel officer, trucking around Dubai, like we were talking about earlier. And in each chapter, if you haven't read it, Sybil writes a chapter, and then Admiral Stockdale writes a chapter. And so I was a Navy spouse, and I was also working with the Carrier Air Wing, and specifically focused on combat search and rescue, which was very much our lessons learned were rooted in Vietnam. And so these two sides of self came forward, and it was a real powerful story for me. And as I revisited this story, I saw the change that came about through these women. And I think we really have to be very grateful to Sybil and some of the key leaders for the way that they conducted themselves with a graceful resolve that produced military family culture in the years to come. So I want to talk just a little bit about that transformation. Sybil Stockdale, really inspired me and continues to inspire me because I think she was a woman that was well ahead of her time, right? And a lot of times when we recognize those individuals, we call them forefathers, but I say like she's a foremother. And these ladies really are the foremothers that gave us this military family culture that we enjoy today. So November 28th this year would be your mom's, Sybil's 100th birthday. Is that right? Yes. So this is a broad sweep of history that that really showcases major change. Only 4 years before her birthday, it was the first presidential election in which women had the right to vote. So that, can you imagine? That's really not, 4 years is not a lot of time. And they elected President Harding. They are credited for really winning that election for him. And that was largely because of women's perspective on the national security decision-making that occurred in regards to World War I by President Woodrow Wilson at the time. And in addition to that, Woodrow Wilson lagged in his support of women's suffrage. So we can learn two things out of this, is that women started out with strong views on national security and impacted our federal leadership as a result in this 1920 election. And also, hell hath no wrath like a woman scorned. He kind of lagged on supporting them, and he paid maybe a price for that. So these ladies already were charting a course that the League of Wives ladies would continue to pursue. So prior to 1965 and kind of the League of Wives era, military spouses, as some of you know, were really expected to throw a good party and keep their mouths quiet. Don't talk about anything of substance. And you could really adversely affect your husband's career, right? And my grandmother was an Army wife at this time, and it was pretty challenging. I'll tell you, she lost a pregnancy at 7 months while living overseas. Her husband was deployed, and it was kind of like buck up, Sally. And that was all the support that existed other than the medical support. She was expected to shine the silver and serve on China, anytime there were parties. And this was kind of the way, right? And the League of Wives step in this moment in time. And after the League of Wives, my mom gets married in 1970 to a Naval Academy grad. So if you're a Naval Academy guy out there, even though I'm a Notre Dame person, I do love the Naval Academy. My mom was very aware of the difference in the time that my grandmother was a spouse and the time that she was going to be functioning as a military spouse. And she was committed to serving on paper and, I'm sorry, plastic, utensils, and showing that anyone could be a spouse that could lead, that could host, that could be part of the conversation. And so I was very aware of these two differences in the way that spouses interacted after the League of Wives and the way that they had interacted prior to it. And I think that there are a couple of other areas that we can see transformation. The Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, some of you are familiar with that. They provide services to families in need. And they were founded in 1904, which is pretty amazing to me. They were founded by officers and spouses and their wives at the time to provide services because there was no pension, there wasn't health care provided even to families at that time. And so I think there's this culture, especially in, I'm gonna be a little biased, the Navy community, of really taking care of our families. The Navy is always deploying, always going away, and it makes for a real tightness amongst the families that I think we still see today. In 1965, the Navy Wifeline Association was established. It's now called the Naval Services Family Line. You may be more familiar with that title. And they formally provide mentoring courses and leadership training for military spouses today. So we see some of that transformation starting to take root in the 60s, largely with the Vietnam War happening. And then, of course, we know that the League of Wives come into existence. They're starting to gather around the table on A Avenue with Sybil Stockdale at the helm. And one of the first thoughts I had as we encountered this story was that they went from the dining room table to the international negotiating table. And I think that was sort of a first reaction to the story. I think in the 3 years that we did this work, we learned a lot more. We learned a lot from Pat and the other ladies who shared their stories with us. And I think instead of understanding the importance of their being at that international negotiating table, I think I see some of the transformation in being that we recognize the importance of what happened at the dining room table, that what happens in our homes and that our military families, their life back on the beach or however you understand the home front, this has an impact on our military success and our national security on the whole. We know that strong families make for strong service members, and then those service members are able to be more effective in doing their job of keeping America safe. And so even the work that was done at the dining room table was as important as the work that was done at the international negotiating table. So they really demonstrated the importance and value of military families, the voice that they gave to the home front, and they also showed the capacity for women to make a difference. As Mrs. Stockdale mentioned, only 100 or so were getting communication from their spouse, but several of these ladies were approached by Lieutenant Commander Burrows, who is a naval intelligence officer, and asked if they would carry out what we call intelligence collection. So they had to think about this because it could put their husbands' lives on the line. If they were found to be engaging in espionage, they could be killed as the prisoners of war. And so they had to take a great leap of faith in making this decision to participate in that intelligence collection effort. So I want to tell you this because if you go over to our memorial, you'll see roses that come up the backside on the podium that are actually sculpted into the podium. And that's very intentional, because this was the symbol that they would use if there was a picture that had a rose in it. They were able to communicate to the POWs that there was a hidden message, and then they knew how to take action to reveal this hidden message. And so we created our sort of patch for the League of Wives Memorial Project, thanks to Nancy Schrumm's daughter, Leah Schrumm, who put roses onto that very identifiable POW symbol, so that we had our own hidden message embedded in our own marketing and communication. So I'll just turn around because there it is on the back. And it was a brilliant design, and we are very proud of the fact how we wove that into the sculpture over there in Star Park. And following the time that the League of Wives demonstrated this capacity of women to participate and engage, we see women increasingly able to participate in serving their country as active duty service members as well. And so I give them a little credit for that. And then finally, I think it's important to talk about how they humanize our service members. I think it's very easy for people that are not familiar with the day-to-day reality of military families to just put this in a context of just another policy issue. And when we decide to take action to engage around the world, that we're talking about real lives, both those people that go forward as well as the people at home and the people that they come home to. We know that mental health is a big part of taking care of our military service members and our veterans when they come home. And I think that, by opening the door to talking about the existence of military families, I think that the League of Wives started us having more open conversation about military family life and how important that is, and recognizing how it impacts our service members ultimately. So today, I started out sort of talking about 1904 and the establishment of the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. As I was working with the Blue Star Family and the America Joining Forces initiative, they said there were over 40,000 nonprofits that are working in the space of military, veteran, and military family life. We really see a huge support that has come about on our civilian side that really enriches our military families and our broader American community, and makes it possible for all of Americans to have a better appreciation for what we do. And I'll just close and say, there is no place like Coronado for really doing that and demonstrating that support and that love. And I think that this story really is most appropriately marked here in this town, and helping the rest of our nation understand how important that is.
Thank you so much, Christina. Over the course of the last 3 years, we figured out that she's definitely the better historian, and I take us into the future. History is not my strong suit. Thank you so much, Morgan, Coronado Roundtable, for having us here. Taylor, it's always a pleasure to speak about this project. And so I'll talk more about the active duty military side impact of the League of Wives. I grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas. There is a naval air station there. Yet somehow the bubble that I grew up in, I had no idea that those orange and white planes that flew over my house every day were military planes. They just flew over the house. They were their Blue Angels. Wow, that's so cool. No idea that every 6 months there were new pilot trainees coming in, and I married the first one that asked me out. So here I am 20 years later. And I've been fortunate enough to spend most of his 20-year career here in Coronado, with one stint in Washington, D.C. And I bring this up because I did not grow up around the military. I have a grandfather who served in World War II, but he passed away before my mom was ever married. And so I was very civilian with zero clue about the military. And then I get moved to San Diego, California, and I just get immersed in military. Moving here, I had no friends, I had no job, and so everything I did was wait for my husband to come home and talk to me in acronyms. So it took many years and lengthy conversations to really understand what everything meant. And what I believe came out of the League of Wives was the support for the military spouses. I joined the Officer Spouses Club for his first command. And then I was part of the Officer Spouses Club for the second command and eventually became the president of that. And then I moved on and I became the president of the Naval Officer Spouses Club here in San Diego. And I had 2 stints in that. And I look back and I think how much support there was for military spouses. And as my husband moved through his career, there was more and more training for me as a spouse. And when he became the CEO of one of the helicopter squadrons here, the Navy sent me over to Newport, Rhode Island for a week-long training. And I think back in Sybil's time frame and Pat's time frame, they didn't train the spouses on how to support your active duty partner in their command. And what happens if, God forbid, there's a mishap and you have to communicate to all of the loved ones at home and really talk about Navy infrastructure and how everything's going to work. Then there was a second week of training offered to me here at North Island, specifically for the aviation command, and to talk about just how everything functions together. I mean, there's squadrons that are part of a wing that are part of this, and there's a lot of information. And when you are trying to support your active duty spouse, you need to understand all that. And I believe that the League of Wives, they were the turning point in this education and training for the families. The Navy realized, the military realized, we need to have training for the active duty family spouse, so that way we can better support them when they go on deployment. We can take care of each other, which is exactly what Sybil and Pat, they were already doing, but now there's the military support for it. After doing that training, I got what I call my deployment. I spent 1 day on a carrier. They flew me out to a carrier and I got to see what it was like for 24 hours and then flew back the next day. And unfortunately, it was after my husband had finished all of his deployments. It would have been helpful maybe earlier on, but it really gives you an understanding of what life is like for them. Because as the military spouse home, there's no idea. And there's been so many changes. My husband and I were talking about his first deployment where there was little email. He had to wait in line for a phone, maybe once a week, every other week. And now they've got internet, full on internet on the ships, and they're getting on social media. There's a lot more communication. And so all of these services and understanding, I really put back to the legacy that the League of Wives left. And with this statue, our hope and goal was to show that these were the foremothers of what we see for military families today from the military side. They were able to recognize the work that they did. And there are so many military spouses coming behind the original ladies who really, our experiences are so much better because of what they did. And so I just was so happy to be a part of this. It was an honor. I learned so much. Again, not a historian, so I knew nothing about the Stockdale family. It's not something that I grew up around. And the bridge with civilian and Coronado and the military really came together with this project. And so I'm just so pleased that we were able to get it done. I will note that the installation is not complete. If you've been over there lately, there are still some rocks around the ground. So the lighting has just been fully installed over the last week. The rocks that are there will be replaced with bricks. And so it'll be easy to walk up to the statue. So there's still a little work to be done at the final installation where it is. But thank you to this community for your support. We raised over $400,000 in 3 years for this statue. And we couldn't have done that. We couldn't have done that without Coronado, without the Stockdale support and without our amazing team who went out and hustled to be able to tell this story. And we're so glad that it's able to stay in Coronado forever. So thank you so much.
Okay, as is our custom, we'll take a 5-minute break and recharge your coffee cups and take care of personal business. And when we come back, we'll be happy to take some questions from the audience. So see you in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Now you can say.
He's not reminded him I was having. I was probably showing my clubs.
Thank you so much.
If you don't sit down, Sean, we ask you for more money. So, okay, Mike is our
Moderator, he's got the microphone, so if you do have a question, please ask in the formal question. And you just raise your hand, take your turn, and Mike will be happy to give you the microphone. Thank you.
And the first statement is not a question, it's actually an announcement from Mike Bowden.
I just want everybody to know, the City Chamber of Commerce Navy get together and give an annual James and Sybil Stockdale Award for somebody who has worked between the military and the community to make a difference. And the awardee couple this year was Alexia and Josh Peters.
Okay, now we can take the first question. Mr. Plum.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate the plug, Taylor, but Sybil was a great woman, and I spent a lot of time over there sending letters out. Day after day, we come home from high school, after school, to write letters, and for months and months, and then they left, and they went to the East Coast, and they took his brother Sid, who was our star football player. And I was very upset about that, but there's two questions, Taylor. One was the move back east, how that affected your family and your mom. And then if you would, there's a great story about your father afterwards where you went to Vietnam and found some of the fuselage, I believe, and made it into a table that's still at your house. But if you could tell the story of going east and then that story, that would be great.
Oh, okay. All right. So we went east in 1970. My mom had become close to Ross Perot, who was doing a lot of work for the POW families, and actually funded an attempted rescue mission, among many other things. And so my mom, as the head of the League of Wives, Perot wanted her to be closer to DC. So we moved there for a year, and that was probably the hardest year that we had, going to Washington from Coronado. My mom actually suffered quite a bit of depression during that time. I didn't see her for weeks on end. She'd be in the bedroom and just trying to cope with things, and it was really the depths of, I would say, our family experience. We came back here to Coronado in 1971, and we started planning for our dad not coming home, essentially, because it had been 6 years, and it was like, okay, we gotta, my mom was like, never gave up hope, but at the same time, I think mentally she was kind of getting ready for that possible reality. So that was the going away part. And then in 2003, so as I said in my intro, I ran a boarding and day school up in Los Angeles County for many years, and we had quite a few kids from Asia, and I would go to Hong Kong quite often to raise money and recruit kids and things like that. And when I was over there one time, I thought I should go to Hanoi, which was like 2 hours from Hong Kong. And so I got in touch with the State Department, who gave me the GPS coordinates for where my dad's plane was shot down. And I went to Hanoi. I met up with this incredible tour guide. He showed me the prison where my dad had been. I went into the leg iron room, the torture room, the interrogation room, the room where he'd been in solitary confinement for 4 years. Did all of that in one day, which was just beyond belief. And then the next day we drove south about 5 hours to this little village. And what happened is my dad, in 1965, he and his command were trying to bomb what they called the Dragon Jaw Bridge, which was the main bridge that from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. And they were coming in to bomb it, and it was too cloudy and foggy. So they did what they called milk runs, where all the pilots scatter and drop their bombs in secondary targets, and they get back to the carrier before they run out of gas. My dad went back in his milk run. He went to try to take out a railroad track in this small village, outside the small village, and they shot him down there. So anyway, we drove to that small town, 2003, and it was kind of a surreal day. But we went all over the little village, very primitive. In fact, the people there had never been in the car before, so they got to ride in the car and feel air conditioning. We probably totally messed up their culture forever, but they loved it. They were having a great time. And then, but then we went to this area where my dad's plane literally, got blasted out of the sky, and I found little teeny shrapnel of my dad's plane, which I thought was amazing. And we were in this eucalyptus jungle, sort of looking for this stuff. And then the interpreter found a guy whose father had been on the cleanup crew when my dad's plane crashed. My dad was the only one shot down in this primitive village during the course of the war, so they knew it was my dad's plane. So long story short, we ended up going about an hour from there into this incredibly primitive, area. And we went to this little home, and this old gentleman came out, and we were greeted by him, and I didn't know whether they were going to take everything I owned. I mean, who knows? I was just going for it and seeing what would happen. But he turned out to be an incredibly wonderful man. Came out, greeted me, didn't speak any English, of course, but my interpreter was there. Brought me into this little hut where he lived, and his family was there, kids, grandkids. We drank some tea, which was horrible. We smoked what I think was tobacco, but I'm not entirely positive. Just trying to settle in and be one with the family. And then he said, in Vietnamese, he said, "Well, your father's plane." I kept looking for a little piece of metal or whatever. He said, "Your father's plane is the table where all the tea thing was." And the table was a wood table. And I'm like, I don't think there was any wood in the A4, jet. I said, trying to be very polite. And then he called his son to take the wood off of the top of it. And he took it off, and there was a metal, big metal, it would look like a big drum, but it was part of my dad's rear combustion. So I looked at it, I couldn't believe it. I just went for my wallet. I was just going to give him everything I had. I just would love to have that. And the old gentleman said, no, I don't want your money, and my tour guide too, he said, no, put that away. That's very offensive. And he said, your father needs his plane back. He wants you to have it. So I was like, oh my God. So I hugged the guy, and we both cried. And it was an amazing moment for me. Just that humanity through everything. My dad was bombing his village. He was in the middle, and here we are, and he's giving me my dad's plane back. So anyway, so then as we were driving out, I told the interpreter, I said, I've got to thank him somehow. And so we went to this little market, and we bought $200 worth of cigarettes, wine, cakes, whatever, just loaded up the car, and we came back and unloaded it, and they were super happy with that. But then I brought it back. And you're welcome to drop by our house on 547 Avenue. It's in my living room. The only stipulation the old man had was that it continued to be used as a table. That was very important to him. So of course I have it as a table now. I have a glass top on it, and feel free to come by and check it out. I got it authenticated at North Island, so there are serial numbers on there, and you can see where a big bullet had gone through part of it. So it's kind of an amazing artifact. And I went right through LAX customs with it. I mean, it's like carrying this big thing. And the security guy asked me, what is that? And I said, I tried to tell him the story. And he had been in Vietnam, and he's like, no problem, go ahead. Anyway, so that was the story behind the plane. A long story, sorry.
Next question. The three of you did such an outstanding job that there are no questions. Okay, Morgan. And then after Morgan's question, you can give Dave Bean to end the meeting.
All right, well, that was a fantastic person. Thank you once again for everyone showing up. I was curious, kind of, Alexia, on the future forward and how this changed the culture, and both of you being spouses,
when you do these spouses things, you probably are seeing like even men go, right? Because the women aren't deploying. You'll see the husband, and now you have even you know, like a lot of different people. It's not just wives now, right? And I was just saying, has that changed the dynamic, or any comments on that? Because it's not just women now that are spouses and out there. Thank you.
So actually, that kind of brings something forward. I actually heard that there was a group that did want to support us because we're calling it the League of Wives Memorial, and they were like, "Oh, wives," you know, but that's the history. You know, that was what the group was because that's who they were. So yes, that there was that change and that difference, and so we would say the League of Wives who transformed the role of the military spouse, right? So we had both of those because we wanted to recognize that today we have, you know, male spouses. My husband was a male spouse, and he says it informed the way that he thought about, you know, being a commanding officer or a leader in the Navy as well, having to be the person left behind. And it also kind of brings up the why the pink, because we weren't trying to be super girly. It's really like not my favorite color, and we actually adopted this pink before Barbie did. Just for the record. So I think it's kind of funny because we got to go to, did I lose it? I'm up. I can be up. Yes. So we went to Tailhook really soon after we first started to take on this project. So I think it was like May that I got approached. August, I was like, oh, we got to do something. And at the IBAR, as things happen, I ran into Roger Welch and I said, oh, Roger, would you please give us a table for free? We have no money. And like Alexia said, we raised $400,000, but it was actually in about like less than 2 years' time because we couldn't start raising money until we had the city approval. We learned a lot in this process. So we got a free table. Well, that was awesome. I was next to 8 guys. They were the best. And then the next year, we missed the boat. Like everybody was coming back to Tailhook because COVID was really, you know, lessening, and we couldn't get a table. So we thought, like, well, what are we gonna do? This time there were more of us going to Tailhook, and we were like, well, we're gonna be traveling roadshow. We had our maquette over there that would show people the design, and we called them the ladies. And we tucked them under our arm, and actually, it's like we're much more fit now because they're not light. And so we had the ladies, and we were like, we gotta stand out in the crowd at Tailhook. Well, guess what color no squadron has? Like, it's this. So we're like, all right, we're gonna be hot pink. And then the best part, I think, was that later we had decided that we were going to feature Sybil. She's the only historical person in the memorial. The other ladies are representative of the national movement. And so we knew that this was her signature pink suit. And I always saw it in black and white. Signature pink suit. I was imagining a pink, kind of like the woman that is over there with like a baby thing, you know, baby Francis. And then finally, like just before the dedication, we saw a picture of the dress from the display at Annapolis, and sure enough, it was hot pink, and we were like, yes, we are super happy to have the hot pink. So you know, some interesting dynamics. They were wives for spouses, but it's all worked out really well.
Okay, thank you. Well, what a great day, and what a tremendous presentation, and what a fabulous project. We're so proud of you and so happy to be associated as a community with great folks like this, and of course the late great Sybil Stockdale and her husband Admiral James Stockdale. Let's all give them a hand for a great presentation. That's all we have for today. Just a reminder that the roundtable will not meet in December. Our next meeting, because of Christmas, our next meeting will be on Friday, the 24th of January, right here in this room. So thank you all for coming. Travel home safely. We'll see you again in 2 months. Thank you.